Welcome to our webinar on the attribution dilemma. Welcome to our audience who are joining us all online. I guess what we are all going to be talking about today is really about how changes in AI and channel preference are affecting traditional measurement methods. From us here at Conversion in partnership with Andy, our published author over at Adidas. Welcome to our panel, who I'll introduce to all of you shortly, and welcome to our audience. I can't see any of you, but I'm sure all of you have your fans turned up to 100, and I'm sure there's lots of kind of familiar faces out there. In terms of the goals for today, I think the panel I will hopefully kind of provide some really useful insights on the topic of attribution to the audience. We really want to get all of you involved, and I think kind of when it's a discussion kind of in combination between the panel and the audience is often how I found these things to be kind of most effective. So we'll be sharing polls throughout today. We'll drop one kind of in a couple of minutes, with which kind of we'll get your insights on, which we'd love your kind of participation on. And I think feel free to kind of drop questions as you have them in the chats, and the panel and I will kind of do our best to pick them up, and kind of we'll try to address any unanswered questions at the end. But let's kick off with some intros. Andy, why don't I come to you? I'm sure kind of a lot of the audience already know you, but yeah, if you could do a quick intro for us, I'm sure it'd be great to the people who don't know you.
If you do know me, hello. Nice to meet you again. If you've never met me before, my name is Andy Headington. I'm CEO of Adidas. We are a digital marketing agency specialising in the travel sector, which we've been in for the best part of a decade now. As Cameron very kindly said, I am a published author. I wrote a book last year called Digital Marketing for Travel Brands. And our company focused very much on search marketing, paid social marketing, building websites for travel companies. So a huge amount of experience around driving traffic, but then also trying to measure it, which is the point of our chat today.
Lovely stuff. Great to have you on. Chris, if you could do an introduction for us, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. My name's Chris. I am the CMO at Mercury Holidays. I've been here for just about a couple of years. Prior to that, I was at Florida specialist at Ocean Holidays. Prior to that, Love Holidays, TUI, and then I worked agency side and sales side many years ago.
Lovely. Great to have you on. Brian, we'd love to get an intro from you.
Hi, my name is Brian with Tropical Sky. I've been with the travel industry now for about 20 years. Currently have responsibility for IT and marketing and all things to do with digital attribution.
Lovely stuff. And last but no means least, Bryony, we'd love to get an intro from you.
Hi, I'm Bryony. I am the marketing manager at Travel Nation. We're a kind of small, independent, around-the-world travel company based down in Brighton. So we do very complex trips, often multi-continent, multi-destination. I've been working in travel since 2006 and marketing since 2007. Very quickly moved from sales into marketing. And I've generally been a one-woman department wherever I've been. So I kind of have taught myself a little bit of everything, entirely self-taught, but always trying to learn and always trying to do better and measure better.
Awesome. Great to have all of you with us. So I think just to kick off, I mean, and anyone who knows me knows that I like to ask quite punchy questions. I sometimes feel kind of the best way to start these things is with quite a direct question. Chris, I know you touched upon it briefly in your intro there. Your kind of experience is so vast across, TUI, Ocean Florida, now kind of at Mercury. I guess in terms of immediate insight for the audience, like what's one digital marketing metric that I guess you think is completely redundant in today's world, and I guess that really kind of our audience members should pivot away from straight away?
I would probably say, and I probably don't think it's going to be the most controversial thing in the world, that I would try and move away from the concept of judging everything based on last click attribution. It used to work, and again, very much depends on what people's media mix is, how much is online versus offline. But last click attribution is probably not your friend for telling you what's actually working. And the whole point of attribution is to understand where the next best pound is spent, and last click attribution will point you to Criteo or some hyper retargeting affiliates, and those probably are not going to build your brand. They're a little bit like Robin Hood stealing money at the end line, as it were.
Interesting. So I guess, Andy, I know we've had some conversations over the past couple of weeks concerning kind of the traditional journey with which kind of a user's taking, or kind of a brand was previously set up with they appear on Google, they get clicks on their websites, they get bookings through. But I guess, hence the conversation today, the way that Google is changing really kind of fundamentally has broken that kind of traditional attribution model. In your conversations with your clients, like what tools are you using to measure attribution across the kind of clients you work with? How do you measure it? What types of insights could you share kind of with the audience in that regard? Can't hear you. Think you're on mute.
See, I was trying to be smart, and then I completely ruined myself. I was going to say the answer is not a simple one, and it depends. Why is that? Because the world of travel has a lot of different booking systems. A lot of companies are very much tied into those, and the booking systems may or may not have a CRM. They may be integrated with something else, or they may not. The reporting internally may or may not be very good. They may not be digitally mature of their website or their digital marketing. So I wish there was a simple way of answering what tools to use, but it's pretty much horses for courses. And I guess one of the dreams of AI I have is that it can help us stitch all these things together, because at the moment it's very fragmented, and your booking system may have a very different answer to your GA4 conversions and various other things. So ultimately, it's a bit of a mess, frankly. One of the challenges which we solve, or help companies solve, is trying to stitch that together, make sense of it. But really, if you can get to a single customer view via your CRM, via your booking system, and integrate it with your digital analytics in whichever form they are, that's ultimately what you're aiming for. The tools you will use will ultimately vary depending on the setup that you've got. So it's a long way of saying it depends, and there's no simple answer, but that's what you should be aiming for, is trying to get that holistic view in whichever way you can.
Yeah, really interesting. Brian, I think, the group perspective is kind of particularly interesting in kind of this regard, in the sense that you guys obviously have kind of Tropical Sky, Canadian Sky, American Sky. How are you thinking about this kind of in this regard? And are you using the same tools for each of your brands, or are there different strategies across the different brands and across the different geos with which you guys are working with?
Yeah, I mean, we're largely using the same tools across all brands, and one of the first challenges that we had was purely at an operational level, being able to very quickly get a view of what's happening across the brands and indeed in marketplaces, because the same 6 brands we operate in the UK, we also operate in Ireland. And shortly after the launch of GA4, it kind of became apparent that while as a data source, it was a valuable data source, the user interface wasn't something that was kind of fit for purpose in our view. So we went down the road of building a bespoke system whereby we extracted data from all of our digital platforms and brought them into a single medium, and then built our own interface on top of it.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. And what teething issues, have you had with kind of that switch over to GA4, if any?
Multiple, and I have yet to come across anyone who hasn't. I suppose the single biggest one was probably expectation that this was going to be the UA. If not big brother, but certainly older brother, that was going to be more mature, more easy to use, more intuitive, and we found it to be anything but. It took us quite a while to get the grips of what it was good at and what it wasn't at, and what it was good at was giving us access to siloed data that we didn't necessarily have at a level of granularity that we didn't previously have, but developing a constructive user interface to that, and also a means of validating it, because we had multiple brands and branches to compare to, we were seeing quite different views of customer journeys and quite different views on sources that intuitively didn't feel right, and then had to spend considerable time real world testing the data we were getting out of it, and sure enough we found that there was a huge amount of configuration that had to be done at branch and brand level that we just kind of assumed would just work out of the box.
Got it. Bryony, I think one of the reasons with which I think I wanted to get you on was because, for the small business perspective with which I guess kind of you have with Travel Nation. I think Brian kind of touched upon some of the issues there with, the time investment required to kind of make GA4 work. How do you kind of see things from kind of the Travel Nation perspective? Are you using kind of different tools for that? What's your perspective on this?
So we use HubSpot as our CRM, which is integrated with Google Ads and GA4. And then our res system now is called Captio, and that is underpinned by Salesforce. So luckily, they are very much a kind of circular system that all works together now. And for me, it's an absolute game changer because being, short on time as one person, I have to put my energy in the right place. And I feel like the only way that I can do that is to rely on data telling me where to put my energy, which is becoming increasingly more difficult to do. So I don't really use GA4 because I find the interface too difficult. But I do have so many reports set up within HubSpot that give me the information that I feel I need to make decisions. But like Brian said, it wasn't an easy migration either from Universal Analytics to GA4. And in general, I think that, you assume maybe because you've taken over from somebody else, or maybe that because that's the way that something's always been done, that your tracking is set up correctly. But that isn't always the case at all. So I think that getting it right and then really choosing what to measure and how to use it to work out where to spend your time is the key to getting things done in a small business.
Yeah, completely agree with you. Completely agree with you. Andy, I mean, you mentioned something in kind of our pre-chats last week that I thought was kind of particularly relevant in terms of like, there were reports at the moment which are saying that more people are getting inspired by Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, I guess kind of other media than kind of Google search. How are you helping your clients kind of attribute success to these kind of channels when I guess it's a little bit of a black hole perhaps in kind of certain instances?
Yeah, there's no real easy way to tie the dots from Facebook organic posts, or Facebook has also have a tendency to claim success for things that may have happened anyway by view throughs or click through, or just impressions sometimes of, oh, we showed the advert to somebody, therefore that's a direct booking. You're like, oh, hang on, and that's a bit of a stretch, Zuckerberg. And then you get the same with Reddit, or you get the same with TikTok or Instagram. All these things are incredibly hard to measure. We're also battling against GA4, as we talked about there, which I used to say was a Google Analytics in name only because the fundamentals were completely different. The way it worked is completely different. But then you also get into privacy with cookies. You get into issues around Apple versus Google and all these big tech companies trying to play off each other and against each other in a lot of ways. So the attribution piece is very, very hard. And I think where we are perhaps heading to is the fact that marketing will perhaps become more of a, I've done this before, trust me, it works approach, which is what you might have had in the 60s and 70s, where the data was there to sort of back up what you were doing. But having that real focus on the audience, real focus on the ideas, I think is probably where we might get to, because the measurement part is just getting really, really hard. And, the investment into social, how much do I put in there? How do I know if I've got return? Are questions I think we're all struggling to answer. And frankly, I still don't have the perfect answer yet either.
Got it. And Chris, I mean, you mentioned this too when we spoke, in the sense of like, I guess marketing used to be an art. I guess it became a science, and now it seems to be kind of coming back to being an art, I guess. Like in terms of maybe kind of your marketing budgets, like, how much of your kind of budgets or kind of is going into these, I guess, kind of dark, untrackable kind of things, and I guess how are you handling kind of internal conversations around that from perhaps senior stakeholders, in the sense of, if you want to spend X on kind of a this kind of YouTube or social campaign, how can you justify it internally?
Yeah, I think there's two bits there. I think come back to Andy's point about things like Facebook, Meta. They definitely do sampled attribution, and we've seen it before. We did for a while. We were feeding back to Facebook ads our booking reference ID instead of our booking value, and the amount of times it would be sampling the amount of bookings it had generated. And we would kind of ignore all the impression-based stuff for reporting. It's a useful indicator, but avoid that for reporting. But even the click-based attribution or click-based attributed bookings it was generating, you could tell had been sampled because they didn't have the booking ID being passed through them as well. So we were kind of able to get a good steer that only X%, half of what Facebook was telling us was a click-based was actually genuinely coming through, and the impression-based stuff was an indicator and could be a wider view there, but also was attaching itself to bookings that may well have happened. We've also tried to bypass GA4. We've had some of the similar issues. So we kind of use GA4 for more specific things that we want to look at on the website, but we use a solution called PWIC Pro, which gives us unsampled session-based data with a PWIC ID, so we can then build it internally to stitch all of those journeys together without having this. You get heavy sampling with GA4, so it doesn't give you the actual journeys, and so that's helped us. In terms of what we do in terms of the dark channels, I mean, it depends how you define a dark channel. We don't put budget into, dark channels that you might term as things like WhatsApp or whatever it might be that are immeasurable. But your traditional channels, we're a traditional business that's been heavily reliant in the past on direct mail, email, and press ads. And you could argue press ads are fundamentally a dark channel based on that description, because you spend money there, unless it's the only thing you do, it's part of a mix. You don't know exactly what it's doing until you stop doing it, and then you see whether your brand searches go down, and you do some correlation analysis. That's mixed media modeling, not necessarily attribution, which is all, attribution, I guess by definition, is click based, because you can measure it, because you can quantify it, whereas mixed media modeling is giving you those relationships between spend and uplift in sales, calls, brand searches. So we don't go into that. We don't do too much in the dark channels, for want of a better word, but we do stuff in activity that's not immediately measurable.
Got it. Really interesting insight on that. I mean, Brian, with regards to kind of the Tropical Sky setup, what are your blind spots kind of at the moment with kind of, with relation to kind of the existing kind of user journey in the context of the changing landscape? For example, are you seeing a lot of traffic come through from AI tools like a ChatGPT, or is that kind of not happened yet for kind of the Tropical Sky kind of brands?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we're seeing in quite small numbers. I mean, it's one that we're particularly conscious of. Trying to follow kind of SEO best practice in terms of positioning for brand placement, but it's not something that we're seeing as a material contributing channel. Now, in terms of where the blind spots are, more the multi-point slow burn sell probably is the single biggest one. That particularly at the high end of the market, where you're looking at bucket list trips that people might be planning over sustained periods of time, will come to the site, may have an ad, may sign up for the newsletter, may download a brochure. In some cases may have attended in person at consumer events, and after maybe 10 points of contact eventually make contact in the call center that get registered as an organic search, and that or possibly direct. So spending time to analysing those, how far back the channel can we trace it, how many individual sessions can be stitched together in a user scoped view. See, okay, we can see that the person did eventually make contact, maybe through a tracked telephone call, where possible have the GA client ID associated at each point along the way. So be it through the phone call, web chat, e-inquiry, brochure download, and compile those into an internal database and try to trace them back as far as. I would say at best we're getting to maybe 70% trackability. But the way I would look at it is, it wasn't that long ago that we were at 30, 40, 50%. So, it is very much an incremental journey. And that as time goes by, you simply to hope that over time that number of attributable sources goes up, and that you can actually trust the data behind them.
Is there a path to getting it higher than 70%?
I'm sure there is. And I mean, but it gets to a point where particularly with those multi-channel, like it was mentioned there, we'll say with your we'll say if you're running maybe a PMax campaign, you've got Bing ads going, you've got Meta, you've got your chat going, and we'll say maybe dynamic phone calls. It is not unusual that the same lead will be attributed to three separate sources, all claiming a point of origin. And for those, we operate a kind of a best trust model. We investigate to the extent possible that we can trace it back to the initial point of contact. And if one particular source more often than not has proved more accurate, then we will give a higher weighting to that source. As regards getting it above, a matter of 70%, it is possible, but maybe it gets to a point of diminishing return that to get to above that maybe 80-85% would take so much time that you're better off going back to core principles and maybe spending time on the UX on the site, because you might get an overall better return on time spent on that than getting the last couple of points of attribution out of it.
Yeah, good insight on that. But Brini, I know when we spoke previously, I think you mentioned that Travel Nation had previously invested a huge amount in SEO, right? I think I guess using SEO as a means of having the brand kind of punch above its weight. Have you? I think you did mention that you felt that your previous SEO investments have helped you in the kind of geo rankings, and like have you found that to be quite a positive thing, and how are you kind of attributing those bookings back to the LLM, if so?
I mean, yeah, we have found a positive with that. So there is a kind of, a light at the end of the tunnel. It's not all bad. Basically, with Travel Nation, like the long-term strategy has always been SEO, in the hope that we could be less reliant on PPC by improving our organic rankings. Obviously, the landscape of digital marketing and travel has shifted over that time. So, the strategy also has to change. I mean, we've heard a lot this year about the so-called SEO crocodile, and lots of zero-click searches. And actually, we've seen not so much a rise in organic traffic, but we've seen a rise in organic leads and in organic bookings. And we've got a very strong presence in the AI overviews. And we actually have started tracking leads and bookings. I think we've had maybe 6 bookings so far this year that we can clearly attribute to AI. And I think that really, being featured in the AI overviews is SEO. Because that is how it is, it's content that is scraped, and it's usually from the first page. So the better your SEO rankings, and technically the stronger your presence in the AI overviews. So for me, it's like that has been the positive of many negatives over the past few months, that it feels like, some of this stuff that I've been working on for years and years is coming to fruition. But again, you really need strong tracking to be able to justify that. For a long time, our managing director didn't understand why I would spend a lot of time writing blogs or asking the consultants to write blogs. And I couldn't, I felt like it was valuable, high quality content written by experts that is useful to other people. And I did the keyword research and things, but I had no way to justify that until we had HubSpot as well. And we could actually see what leads were coming from which blogs and how many of them were converting into bookings. Now we know that they are the most valuable type of content on our website. And, that just helps me to realize that my time is well spent continuing down that road.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I think kind of potentially kind of points to the continued relevance of SEO, perhaps. I mean, Andy, I hear such mixed feedback on SEO, and so I think I was at a conference last year, kind of to do with travel, where the whole theme of it was SEO is now dead. I mean, in the conversations you have with kind of the different CMOs and digital teams with which you work with, I mean, are you still discussing SEO as like a continued strategy for them, with in terms of maybe kind of driving more organic traffic because of its relevance to AI, or do you think it is kind of dead in today's world?
I think anyone telling you SEO is dead is trying to sell something and a complete charlatan. I'm just going to put it out there. I don't think there's any evidence. I don't think there's any relevance that SEO is dead. People have been saying that for 10, 15 years. It's still a very big driver of traffic, albeit the way that we traditionally thought about it of 10 blue links, number one ranking, clicks to website conversions is increasingly disappearing. The organic rankings positions are really struggling because they're being pushed below the AI overviews a lot of the time. I think the last time I looked, it was about 45% of travel searches had an AI overview. You've also got paid in there, and sometimes you've also got maps or other people asked. So the organic positions are being pushed a lot, which squeezes the value of them. But AI overview has to scrape from something. So that's going to be pulled from there. T and others, their whole fundamental model is large language. So it has to get that content from somewhere. And again, some studies done end of last year, early this year, suggested about 2 in 3 searches on ChatGPT are actually just scraping the first 5 results or 10 results from the Google SERPs, understanding what's there, and then throwing it back in a different format. So if you didn't have SEO and you didn't have good content, you wouldn't be found on Google and you wouldn't be found in these LLMs anyway. So it's absolutely fundamental. Really good content written by humans, ideally, by experts, ideally, with a good brand tone of voice, ideally, is fundamental to all of this future. Is just going to be understanding, which bits worked the best and which tweaks to make is the thing we're still all trying to figure out.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you mentioned to me that you'd done some analysis previously concerning the actual kind of clicks coming from the LLMs, right, across kind of the different GA4 accounts. This is perhaps kind of quite a risky question, but is all this AI stuff just super overhyped in terms of its actual relevance towards driving conversions and bookings in travel?
I think it has been last year, and I think it probably still is to some extent at the moment, because it very much depends on your audience. If your audience are, let's say, 55 plus, they are going to be on Google because it's the default. They don't perhaps understand enough about all of the technology available to then start doing things differently in terms of their user behavior, and they rely on Google. Google's now got a good AI in it. So why do I need to use this thing called Claude? I've never heard of it. I'm not sure if it's any good, blah, blah, blah. Once you've tried it, you may like it, but your default will be whatever's on the machine. So I think if your audience are very much Google driven, then that's your starting point really in terms of what you're doing. The data we pulled, which is on our website, I think, or we've certainly got links to it, showed that I think less than 0.5% of all traffic to 4 million travel visits over the last year, last 4 months, were coming from LLMs. Of that, 90% was ChatGPT. So if you are going to really focus on one LLM in terms of measurement, has to be ChatGPT. Everything else is almost irrelevant, I would say.
Got it. So I think to summarize that, so I guess not that much kind of traffic or kind of bookings is kind of coming from the LLMs from what it sounds like.
I just will also add that if you are a higher value customer, or a higher brand in terms of luxury, you do seem a higher percentage overall than like your mass market. So some of the luxury brands we work with, maybe like 3 to 5% of traffic comes from LLMs. Mm-hmm. If you're more mass market, it's very, very small, again, because of the discerning nature of some of those audiences. And that is growing, but I don't think ChatGPT has sort of plateaued in user base over the last 12 months. It's not going to continue the rate that it has. All of my attention would really be on Google and what they're doing with the search results, rather than necessarily thinking about Claude.
Chris, what's your view on this? And I think I take it from the perspective of, we speak to travel companies all the time, and I guess there seems to be some sort of impression or kind of almost need, within the companies to have an AI strategy, a kind of geo AEO type of strategy. If your chairman, as an example, your CEO calls you and kind of asks what you're doing to kind of disregard, but from the data with which you see that it's not driving a huge amount of traffic, conversions and bookings, how do you, I guess, handle those internal conversations with regards to its actual value?
I think it's about context and the effect it's having now versus what it might have in the future. I don't think, the whole AI thing is a fad that will disappear. It will grow, it will evolve, it will change. I think you will find that, like SEO, it will become more opaque over time, and the paid placements within AI will start to take over, and therefore you will have opportunities to appear within AI solutions. ChatGPT is obviously just bringing theirs out, so that will start to commercialize it because they need to justify the ridiculous valuations that they have. So I think AI, in terms, yes, it's small at the moment. For us, again, we're a 55 plus audience. It's probably half a percent of organic traffic is directly measurably coming through the LLMs, of which, like Andy says, most of it is ChatGPT. But that's not to say that it's not growing. But what we are finding is that it is replacing some of those low converting informational searches that people might do. I think I've read stats somewhere that the vast majority of, AI searches start with a what or an if or a why or a when kind of thing, which maybe we're not best placed to answer straight off the back. You do need to think about, with AI, where it gets its information from, because as Andy says, it steals off other people or borrows off other people. So therefore you need to be thinking that certain LLMs will lean more into Reddit or review sites, and therefore you need to have a good presence in those. It's almost like a two-stage, appear well in Reddit. You will get mentions in listicles, you will then get mentions in the chat GPT and get some content that comes through there. But it is very much, I think it's a small but growing in terms of as a marketing channel. How it helps us as a marketing department is another thing entirely. But as a marketing consumer facing channel, it's small, but it needs a big watching brief. And come back to Brian's point about making sure your content is set up in the right way to appear in Google traditional SEO, which is all about rankings and is my content better than theirs, versus a one hit that you get in ChatGPT or equivalents to appear. So it's all about, and getting citations, which is the bit that gets you the clicks through.
And so I think on that, I guess my impression of it is, people are able to get information that they previously weren't able to by, using a tool like ChatGPT. So without kind of clicking through to the website. Brian, is it therefore kind of, the tropical sky perhaps impression, if that is true, that traffic volumes to the websites might be going down going forward? And I think if you guys kind of want to continually grow bookings, does that place further importance on converting more of the traffic on the sites?
Well, taking the two separately, I suppose starting with the convertibility, that is absolutely crucial, because regardless of whether site volumes are going up or down, the cost of driving that traffic is going up. So therefore, the need to better monetize the traffic that's on the site. And I suppose that's where kind of certainly the journey that we're on is moving away from where we had been very obsessed with our weekly review of CPA, whereas we're now trying to see what was the, what was the realized margin per site visitor. So by layering on the various source data, we want to see, okay, for each channel, for regardless of the volume they bring to the site, what is the ultimate revenue that we can best guesstimate, because again, I'm putting in at 70% as a working number of what that traffic is worth. And what became clear from that was that channels that we had been reliant on for quite considerable periods of time, because of their cost-effective CPA in lead generation, turned out not necessarily to be channels that we continue to invest in, because they turned out that even if they were a well-converting channel, they may well have been converting at the lower margin end of the scale, whereas other channels with a higher CPA converted better, had a higher margin on it, and therefore warranted greater investment. And as for the general point, is has traffic gone up or down? We've seen huge variations even within brands as to when Google goes through its various algorithmic revisions on where you're sitting in their SEO rankings. Without a huge amount of work from ourselves, we've seen large increases and significant reductions on the volume of traffic coming through. But I think as we've invested more heavily on site content, we're seeing that the revenue per site visitor continues to go up.
Got it. Got it. Got it. That's very, very interesting insight. I think I'll take a we've had a question come through on the chat, which I will kind of pose from Eliza, who runs the marketing team at Far and Wild. How would you suggest appearing more in Reddit? Do you think some review sites are better than others? Trustpilot are big into pushing their AI trust versus Google reviews. I mean, Brittany, have you guys do you guys use Reddit at all? Does anyone on our panel kind of have a Reddit strategy?
No, but I do think that Reddit at some point was kind of like caught up in kind of disreputable sort of scam for people trying to rig the AI overviews. I don't know, Andy. I think that you know more about that than I do.
Yeah.
But we've never really done anything with Reddit, and yeah, in general, you know, we use Trustpilot, but we use it more for kind of trust than we do for anything else. So no, we're not kind of using anything other than our content on our website to try and be featured in the AI overviews.
Just
Got it.
just on that, I mean, as Brian he says, you know, as soon as anything is sort of thought to be working, marketeers will spam the hell out of it usually. So yeah, there've been all sorts of things going around of I can get you I can get you 5 mentions on a Reddit subreddit for $56, you know, blah blah blah, and it all became a bit of a game for a while. Reddit does have some influence in all the algorithms. The problem I have with all of this research that's published around LLMs and influence, you know, it will say LinkedIn's in the top 3, YouTube, but that might apply to FMCG brands or finance, but what about travel? And the research that I did independently didn't really show Reddit coming up that much in the main. It was particularly bigger brands, the ones you probably would have heard of in any particular category. And then it was more niche PR brands. So, you know, I say niche, but, you know, likes of Condé Nast or The Times or wherever. So I think if you're thinking about offsite PR, it doesn't have to just be Reddit. Reddit is important in the mix, but for travel specifically, I think the LMs are trying to serve the best answer they can. If it knows you're looking for a specific cruise or a particular ski holiday, which is what I looked at, then it'll pick out PR from those places rather than necessarily a generic one. But again, Google will always prefer Google products. So if you've got good YouTube videos and things like that, that will definitely help its influence that sort of perspective.
Chris, do you agree with Andy on this one? Did you have a slightly different view?
No, I broadly agree. It's, you know, Reddit is an example. It's the sort of thing you probably need to, you know, we are dabbling in, but do it organically, treat it like a customer service channel of sorts, that you're going into it, not to be commercial and to shout about you, but to be helpful. Bearing in mind, it may or may not be right for your audience. It's not, you know, 100% right for us. We are a 55, 60 plus demographic primarily. Reddit probably isn't their first port of call, but there will be some on there. You see lots of subreddits around solo travel, around touring, people asking questions about safety, security. So almost putting a toe into it and being helpful is more important than, you know, and much more beneficial than trying to commercialize it in some way, sort of thing. That's not to say that you can't do Reddit ads in a targeted way to reach your demographic you want to reach, like any other display marketing, you know, platform, as it were. But it's about, yeah, digital PR can have a role to play. Anyone who's been to Brighton SEO will say, you know, AI and how digital PR and how you appear in all of the different places, they take a little bit from everything.
Understood. With the fact that your customers are older, 55 to 60, I think you might have touched upon this earlier, but are you guys not doing any kind of direct mail or kind of, you know, more kind of traditional ways of kind of reaching these customers? So I think, you know, previous conversations with which I've had is it seems to be a somewhat kind of still relevant strategy.
Yeah, we do a lot. So we do. I mean, one of the backbones of our business is our database. It is our repeat rate that we have. So we're very, you know, conscious and careful about how we market to them, doing the right things. So yeah, direct mail to our known database. We've dabbled in acquiring others that tend to, you know, and we have A lists and B lists and C lists, and we know where they sit and what they will convert at roughly in any given campaign. So they're the backbone to what we do. Likewise, our email campaigns and email strategies, we're trying to work much more to be more personalized.
Hmm.
build in more automations with that so the content is relevant, trying to not blast people with messages too frequently that they're just not interested in, especially on a longer purchase cycle but booking cycle for traveling cycle for, like holidays is.
Understood. So in terms of that, like, direct mail kind of being I guess a pretty important kind of piece of the business. Is that like, so are you kind of obtaining a customer's like address during the actual kind of like, form inquiry process, or is that like at a later stage?
No, the address you will typically only get at the booking stage, and then it's how you rebook. So one of the biggest
Understood.
things, I used to, many years ago on agency side, I used to work for my sins and my joy on Domino's Pizza. And one of their biggest thing was they talked a lot about the cycle from getting someone from a never booked to a first time booked. Biggest second amount of it was getting them to a second pizza. Once you got them to third pizza, you pretty much had them for life, sort of thing. So everything was about getting them to that first to second, second to third, and then you got them. And that's very much about building out that automated journey, in whether it's in email or it's in direct mail, about getting an inquirer to a booker to a repeat, and a repeat to a loyalist, and then advocate from there.
Hmm.
So building specific journeys that will encourage them, and also measuring that all the way through. What's our repeat rate? What, within 12 months and things like that.
Understood. To probably just flick it to a different topic. I appreciate we haven't. I mistakenly didn't see the poll answers come through. But I guess to pick up on those. So, what tools are our audience currently using to measure attribution? The overarching one is clearly kind of GA4. So I guess kind of based on the conversations that we've had today, GA4 is kind of still having its issues, or kind of still having issues. Well, Chris, I think you might have touched upon it earlier, and I think Brian, you might also kind of be using an internal kind of built tool. But like, what recommendations on tooling would you have specifically to kind of share to the audience, kind of with regards to this kind of specific question?
We've gone internal, so we use PWIC to gather the data, and we stitch it together through with all of our first party data, and then we've built internal attribution tools to stitch those journeys together. Because again of our demographic, our type of product is escorted tours, people are more likely to phone up. So you've got to try and hop them across from desktop to mobile, but also from a web visit to a call. So anything we can do to colour that in as much as we can, is a big part of what we do. When people come to the website, we ask them to sign up to the newsletter. That's a big part of it. That has also unlocked the ability to stitch their journeys together a lot. And then once you've got a booking, that you can then almost work your way back from that, because you've got a booking, you've got a phone number, you've got an email, and so you can start to retrospectively stitch all that data. So it's all about building the data sets and then finding the commonality between them, and doing the coding. So that's where AI, and Claude Code and everything like that becomes much more useful as a tool to help marketing fast track a lot of that work about how you might, connect those data sets, build the attribution models. But yeah, our fundamental is PWIC as a source of website, call data, Infinity, and then we use all of our internal first-party data from there.
Understood. Brian, how about you?
Well, as a primary data warehouse, we've gone with Google BigQuery. That has a native integration to GA4, so data extraction from GA4 is quite efficient. And then to that, then we connect either directly or via connectors, Microsoft Ads, Google, our dynamic call tracking, chat, and the res system. And at each point along the way, then I suppose internal customer email database as well. So all of those are stitched together within that platform, using either primary customer contact details, or preferably where available, the GA client ID for every website touch point.
Understood. Here's a general question with which I think I'd love kind of all of your input on. Like, if I was starting Cameron's Holidays tomorrow and I had a £100,000 budget, but I'm a brand new brand, like, how would you, as kind of the CMOs of kind of, some of the leading companies, tooling wise, set me up, if I was kind of lean on your expertise based on the fact that I'm a new brand with not massive budgets, but I have big dreams to become Audley Travel in the next 5 or 10 years? Andy, it'd be great to have you on this one, maybe.
I mean, it does sort of depend on your audience. I'm going to keep going. It depends. But if you're selling luxury holidays, then you can probably be a bit more personalized with your data collection, because you may have a phone call involved. And if you trained your sales team well enough, you should be able to understand from them, like, what was the journey they went on, and wouldn't necessarily need to rely on a big tool. Ideally, though, if you're probably just going for the basics, call tracking, a good CRM, a good web analytics. It doesn't have to be GA4. We had to talk a lot about it at the time because Google binned off the old one. People didn't know what they were buying, and so they went with it. But it could be Piwik. It could be one called Matamo. There are other ones out there. HubSpot does a decent job at a lot of that stuff. So having just the basic frameworks, you can pick your flavor, you can pick your cost depending on your audience again. But I think one of the fundamental things that gets lost in attribution is just the power of your call center people. Relying on data from GA4 or another tool, it's always done with various caveats of cookies, of browser concerns, of different things. Just talk to your audience. So what journey did you go on? Oh, use ChatGPT and Google. Okay, well, maybe you need somewhere tracking both of those things. It's something I've become very diehard about at Dido, because my data is pretty poor. So I have to ask everyone that I speak to, and I can then take that data and give it back to anyone that wants it in terms of marketing or SEO. But I think we forget about that, just the human touch. Invest in good training as much as good systems would be my top tip.
That's great insight. Brinny, how about you? If I hired you as CMO of Cameron's Holidays, where would you start with me?
Well, I would say that you can't really look at any attribution in isolation. So you can't look at a platform like GA4 without it being connected to your CRM, and then seeing if you get great bookings. A channel that brings you lots and lots of leads may bring you low quality leads that you're spending a lot of your salespeople's time to try and convert when they're never going to do it. So it's about kind of understanding that journey, and even if getting yourself set up in terms of data is expensive at the outset, it will be much more worth it in the long run, because you can't make any decent decisions, I think, without it. And I would definitely say that, once you think you've got it all set up, especially if you do it yourself, get somebody else to look at it. I recently had, when I started trying to implement enhanced conversions on Google Ads, I had our web developers, because I was struggling to to prove that it was all done correctly. I had our web developers contracted to just go over all of our tracking and, Google Tag Manager, GA4, Google Ads, everything, all the tagging on our website. And, to my shame, there are some uglies down there. So, and there are things that you assumed are being done correctly the whole time that aren't necessarily. So in the first instance, getting yourself a strong data setup is the best way to kind of, I guess, future-proof you in terms of a company from all angles, really.
Brian, I think Brittany just touched on a really interesting point there in terms of future-proofing brands. I know that's something that kind of we've discussed previously. Like, how are you thinking about future-proofing Tropical Sky? And I guess kind of what recommendations would you make, to anyone in the audience concerning how they themselves can future-proof their brands, I guess, kind of in this changing landscape?
Yeah, I suppose there are a couple of points to it. I mean, one was, I suppose, to not be overly distracted by what's easiest to measure, and assuming that is the best to do. From our perspective, I suppose taking a step back from the topic at hand of attribution. I mean, ours is ultimately a brand based on quality of people, and giving the people the tools that they need to best impart that knowledge to customers in the most efficient manner possible is probably the single biggest step that we can do. And I think technology will play a huge part in that, in terms of automating everything that can be administratively distractive to highly trained salespeople, so that the time that they spend is maximized in imparting that knowledge to the customer, and putting a tech stack in place that gives them the opportunity to do that. And I think once that is the primary goal, I think the technology platform is secondary to that.
So I think that's a really interesting point. I think particularly concerning kind of, the value of the human touch, and I guess kind of the human knowledge in I guess kind of the customer journey. Are you finding, is it difficult therefore to, when you've had a salesperson, selling Tropical Sky Beach for kind of the last 10 years, if and when you look to hire kind of perhaps kind of a new person in the contact center team, is that a tricky process? And are you using AI to help train these people in terms of kind of upskilling kind of their knowledge, or is that kind of not part of the existing process?
Well, I suppose the first transition point is increasingly it isn't a beach person you're recruiting; it's a tailor-made person, because I mean that's where the business has repositioned itself over the last kind of 2 decades now. As regards in the use of AI as a training tool, I suppose like anyone else, we're at an early stage journey on that. But that I think is quite obvious that the more the corporate knowledge base is made available to every individual on demand, then the easier it will be to transition them up to more complex products. I mean, historically, we would have had formal classroom training sessions with a dedicated trainer who will schedule time in a block. But I mean, I think we're at a point now where I think people are quite comfortable to self-serve, and particularly those with a passion for travel. If the data is set up in such a way that the knowledge base is there to tap in on demand, then that will be a useful tool. But I think it's still not a substitute to the overall principle of having as many people as possible visit the destinations and experience firsthand and relay that.
Of course.
And that where AI probably comes into its own is when staff have come back from first-hand journeys, to be able to amplify that to the others who haven't been to that particular destination.
Understood. Really interesting insight. Let's take this towards kind of the last poll question, with which I think kind of we can use to discuss before kind of we wrap up. So I think that the question we put out to the audience was, what attribution model are people using for kind of offline inquiries? And I think most interestingly, the majority of people, I guess 50% of people have kind of mentioned last click. Now, Chris, I know you said kind of at the start that was the one thing with which kind of you'd recommend them not do in today's kind of landscape. What are you doing from kind of an attribution model perspective? I guess at Mercury, and I guess kind of perhaps for those who joined later in the call, to explain kind of the rationale behind why last click isn't as relevant as it perhaps was previously.
Yeah, and I think all attribution views are just that, they're a view. They're not 100% data driven. Will give you a good view, but it relies on the it's dependent on the data that's coming into it, sort of thing. So last click can work to serve a purpose if your media mix is mostly limited and you don't have a broad spread of activity that runs from the top of the funnel to the bottom of the funnel. But you're going to be getting a slightly warped view of the world. Now, if you are spending another £5,000, £10,000 based on last click, and you're wondering why it didn't do the same, or it's not having the same relational to your performance, then it's because you're not seeing the full picture with last click. You may be lucky, but there's a good chance there. So at the moment, we're just working on, we've used in Mercury linear attribution, but we've actually used a net linear version of that model for a period of time, because we see that some channels just over-index on the volume of touch points, whether it's email or it's organic or it's so-and-so, and we don't want to give, especially maybe to our audience, which is very research heavy, keeps coming back. I can have an attribution pathway that can be like 70 steps long, of which 30 can be organic and 20 can be email. But I'm not going to give each of them, when they become navigational in effect, is what some of those channels are, give them more credit than the one PPC or the one, inspirational email that we sent out. So we tend to do a net linear model just to take away that navigational model. But we've been moving over time and just road testing at the moment, or kicking the tires of a data driven, where we're stitching it together much more, especially where we're trying to go across direct mail, emails, into either website call center bookings, adding in PPC, paid social, and so on. So we're moving much more towards a data driven.
Andy, are you also trying to kind of roll out the kind of data-driven attribution model kind of in and amongst your clients? And like, if you are doing anything different, what insights can you share with kind of the audience with that regard? Of course. Mm. Mm-hmm. Understood. Great insight. But Brady, I think coming to you, if there was one piece of advice with which you could share to kind of our audience, with regards to kind of the topic of attribution, is there anything kind of particularly pertinent which springs to mind in terms of kind of like a last recommendation?
Well, I was just about to kind of join in with that and say that I quite often look at the first click or original source within HubSpot. But I only find that useful if you've filtered existing business out of the picture. So, you can't do it unless you've got your CRM connected to Google Analytics. But, we know that our repeat booker rate is, that we convert repeat bookers at over 60%. So I see my job as trying to get people to that point. So I want to get the new people through the door, and I want to find out where we are getting them at the moment and where we're not getting them. So I find that for me, for that specific task, looking at it through that point of view is really, really useful.
Great insights. Great insights. Nice. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. I think Chris, Brian, Andy, Brianne, thank you so much for all of your insights. Eliza, thank you for your question, which came through the chat. Hopefully this is kind of the first of many webinars and kind of a series with which we're planning to do kind of across kind of travel marketing. We'll be sharing the insights across an email. So to anyone who's attended today, we'll send them out. We'll do some posts on LinkedIn, and I think really thank you to those who've attended, and really excited to kind of potentially see you at kind of more webinars, events at ABTA, and other things over the next couple of months.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cool.
Thanks, Cameron. Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.